Sanibonani babukeli be-Inkosi TV. Namhlanje size la e-ARCA, Johannesburg, Essendon. Ukuzokhuluma kabanzi nge-drug addiction ne-alcohol abuse. Sikhulume no-director, saphinde sakhulumisana kanye nabafowethu ababili abathathe iqhaza lokuthi beze la e-rehab ukuze bezothola usizo. So, please join us in this journey to find out what went wrong.
So firstly, thank you for your time.
No problem.
Thank you for having us. Please give us your name and your position at ARCA.
Okay. So my name is Natrishka Naidu. I am the director of the ARCA Johannesburg branch. So I oversee the running of your day-to-day.
Every day you are here. So what attracted you to this kind of work? Did you study in a field that led you to this kind of work?
So I originally started in terms of overseeing ARCA Johannesburg because our first branch is in Durban.
Okay.
And I actually fell in love with this type of work. I do have a psychology degree as well as an economics degree. So it does help in terms of looking at addiction from a very numerical perspective as well as from a psychological perspective.
Okay, so you look at the mind and
how the mind works, what are the factors that actually contribute to addiction, and the economics aspect helps me to actually look at the numerically proven factors that contribute to addiction.
Yes. Okay. And so coming back to ARCA, when was it established and for what reasons, what made it to come to life?
So the first ARCA was established about 17 years ago, I think, and it was in response to an increase of heroin into South Africa. So we know it as Wunga, Nayope, in Durban is known as sugars, and our medical director saw this influx of children getting addicted to the substance. And he said, look, there must be a better way for us to treat addiction because at the end of the day, medicine has advanced to such a point. Why are we not treating addicts as patients, as human beings? So he developed our detox methodology. And our detox methodology actually allows us to treat heroin patients and help the withdrawals and the cravings in a very short space of time. We obviously extrapolated that type of detox to all substance addictions so that we minimize the withdrawals very quickly, we stabilize that person very quickly so that they don't have to suffer through that process. And that was the main thing and how we came about, is that we saw a lot of our youth getting affected and we wanted to actually step in and help.
Because for a lay person like me, the information that I have is that when people go through withdrawals, it's very painful. And so that's why you find many going back to the drug to minimize or get rid of that pain.
So you're 100% right there. Because of the pain being so severe, especially with a drug like heroin, that becomes very physical and that person needs the drug just to feel normal. And you find that across all substances actually, and I will explain it a bit further, but with all addictions, especially your chemical addictions, you find that there's a mental as well as a physical aspect. And that physical aspect can be excruciating. So if it's not dealt with quite quickly, you find that that person has a higher chance of going back to the substance because they want to relieve that pain.
Of course. And so coming back to families, every patient comes from a family.
Yes.
And so as a family members, how do we recognize that one of our family members is addicted to a substance?
So there's normally a few different ways. One of the first changes, and you know your moms will always notice this, is the change in the behavior.
Okay.
You might find that person is a lot more withdrawn. They don't want to spend as much time with family. They might be even doing things like going out in the week, going out late at night. So those are sort of your first signs that there might be a behavioral problem coming in there. And I always say to families, sit down and speak to your children.
Yeah.
Ask them what's wrong, ask them if they're okay. Another big sign, especially for the younger kids, is when their marks begin to drop. So you see that the school performance starts to get affected. And that's normally a very big indicator because it means that something else is affecting them. Another factor to look out for is things might go missing from the house. So you might find that the child is always asking for money. Somehow the phone is getting stolen every week. things like that. So with addiction, you find that there is an increased need for money, and the child will normally ask for more money, or again, funds will start to go missing.
And what do you find as you look at your patients? Are some or most of the things that lead to addiction, and how physically does someone get to be addicted to taking drugs? Where does it start?
So it often starts in experimentation.
Okay.
Because no one starts using these things wanting to be addicted. It doesn't work like that. You start off because your friends are doing it, because you think it's cool, you want to try it out. That's normally how the basis of addiction starts. Another factor that contributes is stress.
Oh.
So especially after the COVID-19 pandemic and things like that, we saw a huge increase in addiction because there's a lot of isolation. There was a lot of increased stresses. There was things like people lost their loved ones. So there was a huge amount of fear. And we noticed that addiction also increased because it became a coping mechanism.
Okay.
People started increasing maybe the amount they were drinking, maybe the amount that they would use substances, and we found that they became addicted through that. So as I said, very often, in terms of your younger people, it's often experimentation and curiosity. In your maybe older population, it comes often as a response to stress.
Okay. And so physically, like, how does, let's say now someone is addicted to heroin, what are some of the roads that lead to that? What are some of the substances that someone takes mostly that lead to, I'm going to say, stronger drugs?
So the most common ones are alcohol and marijuana, because those are what we call entry substances.
Okay.
Meaning that once you start getting involved in those substances, you will normally build up what we call a tolerance, and you might start to look for bigger and bigger highs. So you might find eventually that either you'll start abusing the alcohol and marijuana more and more, or you'll actually want a bigger high, and that's when you go to the harder substances from there. So unfortunately, experimenting with those, a lot of families will say, you know, it's not too bad. But that is what we found, that most of our patients have started with alcohol and marijuana.
And do you find that in South Africa, the stronger drugs are readily available and affordable?
Yes, and that is a very unfortunate thing right now. I think, there's a very multifaceted discussion to be had around this. Because yes, in terms of the supply being very cheap, very readily available, that's where our police force actually needs to be involved in these discussions. Because we need to say, look, why is it that we've got such accessibility? And we need obviously an increased policing to try and reduce that. On our side, from the rehabilitation space, we look to what we call demand reduction. So reducing the demand of people for the substances by rehabilitating them.
And do you find that over the years since you started, the demand has increased like substantially? You mentioned COVID-19. Even before that, just over the years, does it increase or is it stabilized? It's just...
I think, again, I do think it has increased, but mainly because of the other socioeconomic factors that are coming into play. So right now we're facing one of the highest unemployment rates we've ever seen, right? There's other additional stress factors like the cost of electricity going up, the cost of fuel going up. So this adds a lot of stress and pressure to a household. And when you have that kind of stress and pressure, you do find an increase in addiction because people look of how they're going to cope. And as I said, no one intends to get addicted. So what happens is someone that maybe was having 1 or 2 drinks a week will suddenly find now they're having drinks 4 or 5 times a week. Because they feel that stress, they feel that pressure. And as time goes by, then suddenly they realize, oh my gosh, I'm having a drink every day. Then it's 2 drinks, then it's 5 drinks. So that's why addiction isn't a fast process. It normally takes a bit of time for that person to get into full addiction. But along that way, you start to see things slipping. Their work is going to suffer, and their finances are going to suffer, their home life will suffer. So as time goes by, there's a larger negative impact on the whole family. And that is why in rehabilitation and in treatment, you don't just treat one person. You help to heal a whole family. Because an entire family has been struggling with this one person's addiction.
Perhaps we should go back and explain what is addiction.
So addiction at its very core, is classified as a medical disease. It's classified by the World Health Organization. And it's considered a disease of the pleasure center. So what that means is that you engage in the addiction of whatever the substance is, and as time goes by, you continue to do it because obviously it's giving you pleasure in some way. But what starts to happen is that you don't see the negatives it's causing. So you continuing to do this substance of whatever choice it is, but everything around you is suffering. And you still continue to do it despite the negative consequences. That is what addiction comes down to. The continuation of something that is not benefiting you, but you find that you cannot stop
doing it. So when, as a family member, I see that my brother, my sister is addicted, what are the steps that I can take?
So your first step is always to have a discussion with that person. To sit them down and say, look, we are all noticing this change. We're worried about you, we care about you, we want you to get some help. Sometimes what can happen is that person might completely deny that they're using any substances. The next step then as a family is maybe to get a drug test to actually check if that person is using substances or not. Because if they're using substances, then you can have a discussion about rehabilitation. If they're not using substances, there might be something else that's affecting them. They can go for counseling and get some help in that way. But in terms of addiction itself, it normally starts with a conversation with that person to highlight what their loved ones are seeing. Because very often that person that's in addiction doesn't see what's happening. So it comes from a place of love that you're having this discussion to say, we are worried, all these things are happening, and maybe you can't see it, but we can see it. So how can we help you to keep it?
So if someone refuses and says, no, I'm not addicted, I'm not going to seek help, what then can we do? Because I believe you cannot force someone to go
So there is something called a Section 33 court order for rehab.
Okay.
And that can be obtained by family members where the person is refusing treatment, and obviously the family can see that it's getting worse and worse. So that process does involve having social workers to become involved to do a report. That report gets taken to the courts, and you request from the judge to say, look, this person is actually becoming a danger to themselves and others, and we want to get them help, and then the judge will issue a court order for rehab.
Okay.
So that means either the person goes to rehab or they go to jail.
Okay.
And that is the final step a lot of families take when their loved one is refusing treatment.
It's a good thing to know that our hands are not tied.
No, exactly.
Also, we can help our loved ones as well.
Yes.
So coming back to ARCA, what's the core function of ARCA?
So at our core, we are an addiction treatment center. We treat substance addiction in terms of alcohol, illicit drugs, as well as prescription medications. We also treat other addictions like gambling addiction and sex addiction.
Oh.
So there are other addictions that might be not chemically based, but are also negatively affecting somebody. So we are an addiction treatment center at our core.
Oh, so you treat, okay, that's wonderful. And over the years, if you can make a rough estimate, how many patients have you seen and treated from all provinces of South Africa?
So I'm going to count both of our branches, our Durban and Joburg branches. We've probably treated about over 10,000 people.
Wow.
So lots of families obviously making these changes. We helped a lot of families and a lot of people to heal. And obviously there's a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, for all of us.
Yes.
So in the beginning you spoke a little about the kind of treatment that you offer. Can you explain more what kind of treatment and how is it different from other people that they're offering?
Sure. So the first thing that we do at ARCA is we do what we call a medical detoxification. This is done with our doctors and our nursing and our whole medical team, and is done through intravenous drip. So this is one of the safest and fastest ways to detox a person from the substance.
Okay.
It also ensures, as they go into this detox process, that they don't have any negative consequences, meaning things like seizures, and helping to speed up getting the substance out so we minimize their withdrawals, so they're not suffering as much. And the approach that we take is all very medically proven, the latest medically proven techniques for addiction treatment. And once the detox process is done, and that's a very vital process in the addiction treatment process, then we use non-addictive anti-craving medications,
Okay.
which actually help to minimize the cravings for the substances. So once you deal with the withdrawals and cravings, a person is in a far better state mentally and physically to undergo the counseling.
Yeah.
And the counseling is also a very vital part of the treatment process. So we do a counseling modality called cognitive behavior therapy. And that helps, especially in a short-term program, to very quickly identify what is affecting the person and how we can help that person make those changes. Part of our program as well also heavily involves our family members.
Okay.
Because as we said, this is a family disease. It's not only one person. So we also have to involve our families to say, look, how do we make these changes for you as a whole family? And that is why after our programs, we also offer what we call aftercare.
Okay.
So aftercare is also very essential in the rehabilitation process. Because firstly, it helps to educate our patients in terms of long-term support and long-term education around addiction. But it also helps to educate their families. Because a lot of families don't know anything about addiction. They find out their loved one is addicted and they don't know what to do. So we provide education free of charge for a year to all of our patients in terms of weekly group sessions. And that helps to give those families the support that they need as they go through this process with their loved one.
So they don't just walk out the door and then it's
And
all
that's
finished.
it.
Because then maybe there would be a threat of them going back to because now we don't know.
No, exactly. And
so you work with doctors and psychologists and it's a
social
whole-
workers. All of our treatment suppliers are all professionals. So as you said, from doctors to nurses to social workers, psychologists, counselors, everyone is trained in their field.
That's excellent. And how long is your treatment program, or does it depend on a patient?
It does often depend on the patient. So our traditional program is a 21-day program. It's a 3-week program. But we have adapted this program to each individual.
Okay.
So we even offer an outpatient program because some treatment professionals cannot take off 3 weeks. And it's not fair to say you can't get treatment because you can't take 3 weeks out of your life. So we've adapted each program to each person so that they get the best out of the treatment process.
Do you find that many people are able, for instance, you are able to offer space and time to everyone that needs it, or do we need more facilities that are built, that our government gives us more facilities to treat more people out there?
I think we do perhaps need more facilities, only because, as we discussed, there has been an increase in addiction. There's also an increase in people wanting help, they just don't know how to get the help. And again, because of the current socioeconomic and economic status of our country, a lot of people don't have the funds for treatment.
Yeah.
And this is the biggest challenge, that addiction disproportionately affects the poor.
Yeah.
Because the poor may not be able to access the private health care and this and that. They're reliant on the government centers.
Yeah.
And sometimes there is a backlog in the government centers because of so many people needing help. So I do think an increase in centers is important. I also do think an increase in education and awareness in communities. Because a lot of people, as we said, will start experimenting with these things, not understanding what the consequences can be. And once you're already addicted, unfortunately, then you have to go for treatment. You've got to get into a program to make these changes.
Do you find that younger and younger people are getting addicted to different kinds of substances out there?
So unfortunately, yes. I think one of the youngest calls that we had, and unfortunately we don't treat minors, we treat 18 and above.
Okay.
But one of the youngest calls we had was for a 9-year-old.
Oh.
Now, that is shocking, a child that young. And unfortunately, the dealers are also targeting some of these younger kids because they know people won't really suspect such a young child. And sometimes the dealers are even giving these drugs away for free.
Oh.
Because, the first few times the person uses it, especially a young child, and then they get hooked on it. So that is the terrifying thing, that younger and younger children are getting addicted.
That's just sad.
No, it is.
Yeah. So are there centers that treat young people like?
So there are centers. There aren't. Again, we do need more of them.
Yeah.
Because previously, not as many young people were addicted.
Yeah.
Now, because there's more and more younger people getting addicted, we do need more youth centers that specifically treat younger children. Again, it is a completely different type of license and things like that. So I do feel that we would actually benefit from increased youth centers.
And just thinking of that, when a 9-year-old now needs drugs, do you find that it leads to crime?
It
That they
can.
need this money to now pay for these drugs.
Yes. So either they will start stealing from the family, or they might become involved in crime, through other avenues
Yeah.
because of that desperation. And I think it's even harder for someone that young because at your very young ages, to actually understand and have that maturity that's not there for a child. So how do you explain to a child that this is what's happening? And from such a young age, you've already developed this type of addiction.
And you find that as families, we contribute to this, to addiction. For instance, in the home, there's alcohol, and then we slowly, the child gets used to this kind of environment. And how do we as families contribute to?
Well, I think the environment also does play a factor. Alcohol is one of those, it is one of the substances that's quite prevalent in houses. But again, there are other substances. So if there's very often marijuana use or other drug use in the house by adults of that house, you are normalizing it to the younger people in the house. So environment also does play quite a key. And as I said, also checking in with your children. Spending that time to actually have those conversations with them that this is not good, this type of lifestyle is not good. And showing that interest to say, are you okay? I'm seeing this behavior change. I want to be involved in your life. To me, the involvement is a very big part. Spending that time checking in with your kids once a day. How are you doing? Checking their homework, things like
How's
that.
your day?
Yes. Have you, if you saw that your child was always a B student and now your child is a D student, you have to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that's where parents need to get more involved with their kids.
So we need to look at ourselves as well as a whole.
Yes.
So not just the person that's addicted, but our behaviors as well.
Exactly.
So going to our communities, there's a negative stigma that goes with someone that's addicted. How do we erase or start to remove that stigma in our communities?
So the biggest way is through education. Many years ago, we had a huge stigma around HIV.
Yeah.
And yet now it is very accepted, very understood, because we actually did an entire education campaign around addiction. And that helped people to understand that it's a disease, help to understand more about it, and help to encourage people to go into treatment. Now it's the same thing with addiction. The more that people understand about it, and the more that they understand it is a medical disease, it's not a matter of willpower, or this person is just being naughty. It does come down to a very physiological, mental and physical addiction. And that has to be treated medically as well. And you would not punish a child for being diabetic.
Yeah.
You wouldn't stigmatize that child.
Yeah.
Why are we stigmatizing people for an addiction? And the misconception is often because it's a choice.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, is that initially, yes, it might be a choice. You might, as I said, experiment, try something, but at no point does that person want to be addicted. And that's something that we need a better understanding of, that this is how addiction works, so that once we actually, if someone that we know becomes addicted, we have a better understanding of how to help them. And that's where, I did mention to you earlier, I think, that we do need things like an addiction ward in our hospitals. Because addiction is a medical disease, we have diabetes units, we have hypertension units. Why do we not have addiction units in our hospitals when it currently is one of the most prevalent medical diseases in our country?
I think that's a good point. That will change people's minds and renew people's minds, because
Exactly.
we always think, he chooses to, he chose to.
Exactly.
But I think what I'm understanding is that our bodies are different and they react differently to substance. So you might drink wine, I might drink wine. One might be addicted, one might not be.
Exactly. And obviously, as we said, there's so many different contributing factors. Things like coping mechanisms come into play, things like family history. And again, as we said, right now with the current stresses of our economy, there's a lot of different factors that contribute to addiction. So we also need to understand it from that perspective, that if it's in our hospitals, if we have those types of wards that are accepting, it might help to lower the stigma and actually allow people to intertreat with malaria. Because right now there's a huge stigma, as you said. So people are also maybe embarrassed or worried about entering treatment. But if it is more accepted, I think more people will get treated.
Will come through and on. So what is the future hold for ARCA in South Africa? What are your future plans?
So I think in time we would like to look at maybe expanding to other provinces. Right now we are only in Durban and Johannesburg.
Okay.
And I think there's a definite need for it. So from what we're seeing around the country, there is a growing problem and we do need a growing response to that problem. So in the future we would like to, obviously as I said, maybe expand, maybe look at how we can increase our community involvement as well and get more involved in our community, even though we do also do a lot of community work, community talks and things like that, but also increase our community involvement from our side.
And what kind of feedback do you receive from someone that has received treatment and doing better after it? What kind of feedback do you receive?
So very good feedback. We get a lot of gratitude. From families saying, you know, thank you for saving our child's life. Thank you for saving our family. So there's a huge amount of gratitude because you helped to change an entire family's life, not just one person. And when that person comes back and says, you know, come and say to me, Trish, look, I'm a year clean. By the way, my business is doing well. My family's happy. On the weekends, previously, I wouldn't spend time with my kids. Now I'm spending every weekend with them. When you see that positive coming out of it, that's what makes it worth it for me. That every day I get to see that positive result of helping someone.
And I would imagine that the kind of work can be stressful that you are doing. How do you take care of yourself mentally, physically?
So this comes down to a lot of self-care and developing healthy coping mechanisms, which is something that we teach here. So I like to cook, I like to garden, I like to read, love spending time with my family. So I do things that feed my soul and that helps with all my stress management.
So it must be a conscious decision to take care of yourself as well.
Yes. So self-care is a very important factor for every single person, but especially for someone that's in recovery, it is a vital part because during addiction, you often forget to look after yourself. So when you're actually on your road to recovery, reminding yourself that I'm an important person. I need to take care of myself so that I can be the best I can be for myself and for others.
And so where does, if someone is, for instance, or let's start here, what message do you have to someone that is struggling with addiction, any kind of addiction? You mentioned different ones. What's your message to them?
So let's say help is available. You don't have to suffer. Reach out, ask the right questions, and find out how you can actually help yourself to get your life back on track.
People are out there to help you.
Exactly.
And where does someone with an addiction problem find you? How do they reach out to you?
So with us, you can also look on our website. It is www.arcajhb.com, or you can contact our helpline on 0622770911. That's our Johannesburg branch. For our Durban branch, you can contact 078-2722-911.
And someone is always there to answer.
Yes.
So we are we're grateful. We are grateful for the kind of work that you do and your dedication. May you continue to increase like you are wishing to do.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming out today, because for me it's very important to get this message out and to improve and increase the education around addiction, because it's only through that can we increase the treatment, can we reduce the stigma, and can we actually help our youth not to get lost in addiction.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.